Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to my library tour for 2022. I'm creating a visual record here of all the books I own, but I am occasionally branching out from that. I am occasionally showing you books that I have owned but own no longer, the Library of the Lost. I did a few installments of this when I was up in Vermont at Mark Richardson's old house up there in Vermont, where I ran out of books and I knew that I wasn't going to be back here, and I was delayed even longer than that by a freak snowstorm. 20 inches, 2 feet of snow here in Boston in a matter of hours. But a number of you have said that even when you go back to touring your actual bookshelves, we'd like to see the Library of the Lost now and again as well. And for reasons of my own, ergonomically speaking, that fits just perfect with this week. So we're going to go through some Library of the Lost installments, and I've got them on the iPad Mini here. The iPad Mini says Richardson, but it does not come from the Richardson family, I assure you. I have my eye on one of their iPads, but it's not this small. But anyway, we're going to go through some of these and just see. These are books that I've had at one point, but have no longer, and wished that I had in most cases. The first one, not so much wish that I had, because books like this, big synthesizing political analysis books, are usually works of a season. You read them and you like them, and they're interesting for the news in the paper in the morning. But there'd be very little reason for you to go back to it in 40 years. There'd be very little reason to do that unless it was beautifully written, and they're almost never beautifully written. This is by Richard Barnett, and it's The Alliance. And it's a book about America, Europe, and Japan in the 80s, and how they might chart the future, what the future would be like. And if I remember correctly, this author is a very smart guy. He seems very smart on the page, but he doesn't do more than a 50-50 job of predicting the future, and that would be the only reason. I don't imagine if I saw a big trade paperback of this thing that I would grab it, because it's outdated in every way. And if I remember correctly, his prose is a little bit pedestrian, so there'd be no reason for this one. And same thing with this next one. This next one is paperback trash. I read it and remember liking it, but I liked it mainly not for the reasons that the author thought I would like it. This is by Jesse Ford, and it's called The Burning Woman. She was a virgin. He was a priest. This is just an old mass market paperback. I read it and it fell apart while I was reading it. And it starts out in Venice, and that intrigued me, and it's done fairly well. But then it gallivants all over the map of Western Europe. So, and the story is fairly tortured. I don't remember there being much to enjoy about it. So even if I saw it as a mass market paperback, I doubt that I would grab it. I really doubt that I would. Then this next one is a classic by a great author who didn't write the text in the book. This is the illustrator Peter Spear, who I every time I find a kid's book of his, he was a great children's book illustrator, and every time I find a book of his, I grab it at a used bookstore. I don't see them all that often. And this one is The Fox. And as you can see, where it's illustrated by Peter Spear, but where you would ordinarily have an author, it just says an old song, because that's all this is an illustration of the old folk song. That I don't know how many of you will know it. The fox went out on a chilly night, prayed to the moon to give him light, for it many a mile to go that night before he reached the town, oh, town, oh, town, oh, many a mile to go that night before he reached the town, oh. Did you ever sing that? Maybe somebody had a fiddle. Maybe it was the end. It was harvest time or whatnot. Maybe there was a gigantic trestle table of food outside on one of the last beautiful temperate evenings of the summer. No, I may be dipping into my own memories, where the goal was not just to sing the song and have a heck of a time doing it, but to extemporize verses. The verses have each stanza has a very set form that has to end with the town-o, the town-o, the town-o. You have to bring the action. It has to come back to the town every single time, right? The old gray woman jumps out of bed, says, John, the great goose is gone. The fox is on the town-o. And some of you may know this song. I don't know. Maybe I'm dating myself. I could be dating myself. Some of you may know this song not from, the local fiddler, or singing it to yourself, or singing it with your friends and family, but from the 90s, the 2000 bluegrass trio, Nickel Creek. Any Nickel Creek fans out there? Nickel Creek is disbanded. They're long gone. They all exist. They were extremely young. they were extremely young and virtuoso, so their stuff was great. I used to listen to the first few of their adult albums all the time, and saw them a couple of times in concert live. And they do a rendition of the Fox that is just incredible, of course, especially live, especially if you can get their mandolin player, Chris Thile, in a performance of a song that he had done a million times. He might decide to just do a riff, to just start this riff on his mandolin in the middle of the song, and it was always a supernatural watching experience. It was just, you couldn't believe that you were seeing it. My thought, I've seen him do that 4 times live, and each time I had the same reaction that I had the first time, which is that this must have been what it was like when members of the audience watched Johann Sebastian Bach do that. When Johann Sebastian Bach was playing a familiar piece, he would often extemporize, sometimes for 40 minutes at a time. There's no one in the audience who was taking that down, no one who could write notes that fast. They were just enjoying it. And a lot of times those extemporizations of his seemed supernatural. He seemed like he was just possessed by the brilliance of it. That would happen to Chris Thile on a fairly regular basis. I saw him do it once in the middle of Nickel Creek's version of the Fox. So some of you maybe know it from that. This is one that I would grab in a heartbeat if I saw it. Okay, maybe not this next one. This is by Thames Williamson, who was a schlock potboiler writer, not that much different from Jesse Fort, just decades earlier. And this is The Gladiator. What does the tagline say? This is a perma book. Trust me, it's not permanent. A brutality, lust, and evil amidst the degenerate splendor of a decadent empire. And there is the Gladiator. And he has a very, 1930s, 1940s movie star chin and hairdo. No one who looked like that ever showed up in a Roman arena. And he's wearing, that harness are those jewels? And what kind of a shield is that? I don't even know what that is. And check out the size of that codpiece. Good Lord. And he is so much staring death and destruction on all of the overfed, pampered nobles in the audience that he's completely ignoring he's completely ignoring the nubile virgin, who is tied to a post behind him there. You'd think that would be where his attention is. And we won't even talk about the Spanish cutlass in his hand there. It's a mess. But I seem to remember liking the novel. I went through a period where, it wasn't actually a period of me. It was actually a period with a used bookstore that I was going to at the time in, I think, Austin, Texas. That it was just... it was a used bookstore, and it was really good. Used bookstore, friendly staff and all. But there was a room in the back that was just mountains of mass market paperbacks. Just mountains of them that the owner had said, just go back and take what you like. I won't charge you much for it. I promise. But you're going to have to sort through it yourself. You would come out of that back room, your fingers would just be coated black. And I found a copy of this. And when I was back there in a couple of visits, I found a whole bunch of Gladiator novels. So I read this then. That was a long, long time ago, and there wasn't anything to recommend it. Unlike this next book, this is The Longwinded Lady, Maeve Brennan. This was an old collection. I had this as a hardcover. Don't have it anymore. Pretty sure that this has been reprinted by the New York Review of Books, but I know that it's probably reprinted by other people. This is a collection of Maeve Brennan's Talk of the Town columns for the Old New Yorker, and they are great. They are absolutely great. They are very chatty, almost topical. So you would look at them and you might read one of them and think, okay, well, these won't survive. They'll be around, but the humor and insight will date so badly that they'll be like being in hieroglyphics if you read them, and that doesn't happen. Because of how good she is, that doesn't happen. I'd love to find a hardcover copy of that. Okay, this next one is a fantasy novel. This is from Daw, number 916, back when Daw was numbering their books. This is by Roberta Cray, and it's The Sword and the Lion. And those of you who are big fans of Guy Gavriel Kay's Tigana book, for instance, or things like that, where a fantasy author creates a fantasy version of an actual historical period, will probably like some of this. The fantasy version here is ancient Greece, as you can see, because the fantasy Parthenon is on fire up there. But that's what is happening in this book, and it's fairly well done. I want to make sure that the bean is visible here. we want both the books and the bean. and the Babe. I haven't seen The Sword and the Lion in forever. I don't know when I had this last. It was just an ordinary mass market. I don't. Okay, this next one is a big work of history. You would think, I think this is from Harvard University Press, the Belknap Press. You'd think, since it's a big work of history and pretty much definitive in English, that I would still have it. I have no idea why I don't. I found a record of this thing and looked for it, and I don't still have it. It's by, it looks like I cut off the author's name, Peter Wilson, I think. This is The 30 Years' War, Europe's Tragedy. A big fat book about the 30 Years' War that is terrific. I loved it. No idea why I would get rid of such a thing. I guess it's possible I could have sent it to someone who really, really wanted a book on the 30 Years' War, but how many people like that are out there? Not many. Then we have something for the gays. You gotta always have something for the gays. This is by an author going under the pen name of Erastes, not Erasmus, but Erastes, and this is Transgressions, from a line of books that came out that styled themselves as an M/M romances. These were the first books to do that. This takes place, I think, in the 1600s, where a young man encounters a very, very strapping blacksmith, which is absolutely true. You would never see in 1647 or 30 or whatever, you would never see a body like that. That would never happen. That is a Peloton. That is a Soloflex body. But the only chance that you would ever have for seeing anything even remotely like that would be the village blacksmith who was working with heavy irons all day long. And I read this and loved the passion of it and the clear sense that the author seemed to be having fun. And some of the period details were relatively accurate, but it was hard to ignore the elephant in the room, which is that this would never happen. No version of this plot line would ever happen. Not certainly the way it is. If it did happen, the one thing you as a reader would know for sure would be that there could not possibly be a happy ending. And I guess I would grab this thing if I saw it. I would grab it. I don't know if there's an ebook of it. Okay, this next one is a romance novel. I always want to have a few romance novels. This is one I wish I still had. It's just an ordinary mass market by Margaret McPhee called Untouched Mistress. And the story here is that a nobleman finds a beautiful woman washed up on the shore, and she doesn't seem to remember who she is. But does she? Does she remember who she is, and she's pretending that she doesn't in order to escape from a world she doesn't want to be in? And if so, has she fallen into a worse world? Or maybe the world of her dreams? I really enjoyed this, and boy, oh boy, do I wish I knew who that cover model is. Not her so much, but him. I wish I knew who that is. He had a heyday. I don't think he's on romance covers anymore, but he had a heyday where he was on a million romance covers, including tons and tons of Regencies. Far more Regencies than, for instance, Paul Marin, who is a cover model whose name I do know. I don't have any idea what this guy's name is. You romance diehard fans out there of a certain age, if you know this guy's name, I would love to know it. But the only chance that I would ever have for getting a print copy of this book is if I would go to one of that kind of a used bookstore that has tons and tons of old romance novels. It used to be those were fairly common. In this area, there was a string of them called Annie's Book Swap. I haven't seen them in forever. Not in forever. And you ordinarily need a car to go to a place like that, so I may never see another mass market paperback of this thing. And that's a shame, because I don't think there are ebooks of any Margaret McPhee. Then we have a book by Alwyn Scarth called Vesuvius, a biography. It, of course, is not a biography of Vesuvius, despite the title. A friend of mine who was an old friend of mine from decades and decades ago, you would actually know his name. There's a feature of Earth's solar system that has his name on it. He used to tell me over and over again, he used to go on and on about how it isn't possible to write a biography of the planet Jupiter, for instance, because in human terms, nothing happens on Jupiter constantly. There's no way to do it. There's no way to do it in human terms. Jupiter or Saturn, nothing happens there for a whole millennia. Things are happening all the time, yes, but no story. Nothing like what a human would consider a biography. And that is true of Vesuvius as well. Obviously, when you see a book called Vesuvius, a biography, what the book is going to be is a biography of all the times that Vesuvius inconvenienced humans. And that's what this is. And it's terrific. It's really, really well done. It bothered me a little. Who was it? Daisy Dunn a couple of years ago did a book very much like this on Vesuvius. And it bothered me when I was reading all the reviews of that book, how many reviewers were saying this had never been done before. When it was done just a few years earlier in this book, and it's been done many times before this book. But I remember liking this. I wish I had this as a hardcover. I wish that I had never got rid of it. What else have we got here? Okay, this next one is by P.H. Newby. This is Warrior Pharaohs, the rise and fall of the Egyptian Empire. And the thing that stands out about this book, the thing that I remember about it that I really liked, is that it was about the pharaohs at war, as opposed to what so many ancient Egypt books are about, which is, the stylized artwork or the obsession with immortality and death or the rising of the temples and pyramids and whatnot. But a lot of pharaohs conducted war. A lot of times in many dynasties, it was considered almost a rite of passage. You weren't a successful pharaoh unless you engaged in warfare of some kind or other victoriously. I have a very small number of ancient Egypt books. I wish I still had this one, but perhaps the Brattle will provide. You never know. And then we'll finish up with this last one, a classic in its little realm that I really wish I still had. This is by Jerry Coyne, and it's called Why Evolution is True. And there it shows on the cover a transition from a small hollow bone dinosaur to a bird. And this came out probably 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, something like that. So probably around the edges, some of the science has been chipped away. But I remember this being just beautifully polemic in its tone and its address to readers. This is was very much aimed at the recrudescence of the idea of intelligent design and creationism being smuggled into schools, into public schools to be taught to children. Despite the fact that every time it comes before a court of any kind, it's struck down because you're not in public schools. You are not allowed to teach children religion. You ought to teach them about religion, as Daniel Dennett always says. If you taught them about religion, that would be great. But no organized religion in the world wants you to teach children about religion. They want you to indoctrinate children into their religion instead of teaching children that there are a million religions in the world and they all want to indoctrinate you. If you teach children the second thing, they'll come out of school not wanting anything to do with religion. All of them will. And religions know that, so that's the last thing they want. They don't want that. But these things come in waves. It's not going to matter in a couple of years. If a wave of this science denialism crests in a couple of years, it's not going to matter here in America. But it will matter if it happens somewhere else in the world. It will matter that crest of creationism, science denial, won't be setting the curricula in America in a couple of years. So it's not going to matter anyway. But the last wave was about 20 years ago and gave rise to all of New Atheism and to a whole bunch of books like this. And this is terrific. If you have this at your library and you're interested, you ought to borrow it and read it. And I had a hardcover of this thing. I got it from the publisher. Gone. Like the snows of yesteryear. Gone. No idea why. But that's our first installment of Library of the Lost. We'll do this for this week while I figure out what to do with the little book room. I mentioned the problem that I have is that technically if you're going east to west, the next bookcase is a tall, double-stacked bookcase of romance novels. And I thought that's a lot to ask of most readers. Most readers, even most readers on BookTube, are book snobs. They might have shed the last vestiges of that book snobbery in most other areas, but they will hold on to it until they die when it comes to romance novels. That is the one place where you are expected to be a snob. And so going through, it's probably 500 romance novels packed into that bookcase seems like something that would be really entertaining if I did it with Sarah from the Bookish Knitter the next time she visits. If she ever visits again. Nobody seems to want to visit me. I'm a lonely old shut-in, and nobody comes to visit me, even though they all have cars. But anyway, if we were to do that together, that would be fun. But otherwise, I think I might skip that bookcase and go straight on to the last one in that room. But for this week, I think I'll just hang out here on the couch and do the Library of the Lost. They work. They count just the same. Then we'll move on. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.